can't help improve Adobe products. Adobe, it's so weird to me, Adobe. Who's the CEO of Adobe? It's strange. I know they make things. Weird. Anyway, I know, we have a student who works. I think that, strange things happen inside of PDFs, including this kind of thing. Okay, so it's been an interesting couple of weeks. I hope you are refreshed. I'm struggling up and down a bit, but yeah. Unknown source of COVID for me, and none of my family got it, but it was kind of a nice circumstance where my family was away for various reasons, so it was just me and the cat for 14 days. Got a little grim. I had everything in the freezer. Like it was, vegetables slowly. I mean, there was some outside assistance.
It's good to go to the freezer, otherwise
it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It was useful. you know how that goes. Yeah. So, yeah, but I felt back to normal. And Omicron doesn't go into your lungs, so it's a huge. Which I knew that, but I'd forgotten about it. And my wife told me on the phone at some point. And I'm like, oh yeah. So, which is big because I have like a lot of problems, but I was worried about that. Yeah, so that's a real mercy. That was, of course, the thing that really harmed people. This kind of very unusual damage that's done to lungs, which could be permanent for some people. So, yeah, but just weird. Anyway, I think vaccines are probably a good idea. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, so during that time there was a war. So. I know I got to speak to you a little bit during. It's hard to remember everything, right? But I was up for talking to you just online. We did do that. I forgot about that. So we did do that. But then I sort of got sick again. So, and the thing that really got me was a 4-hour meeting online. We had this 4-hour meeting. I thought I could do it. I thought I could do it. So I did it. But it was a meeting about how to run teams as well. It was terrible. It was just an embarrassment, the whole thing. It was just so embarrassing. And then after, I'm like, God, I hated that. And then I'm like, just dead. But it's been up and down. Anyway, so so I'm going to talk about me. So this is a huge deal. This is like the biggest thing. I think. I mean, there are a lot of big. Well, it's all your own lunchbox, right? But I mean, of the things I've worked on over the years, as time goes on, you're like, put a lot of effort into this. Still think it's great, no one else does. There's sort of a variety of kind of things that, these seeds you've kind of planted. Or, this took off, I thought it was kind of okay, or whatever, but blah, 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 right? So, but, I really do think this is a giant deal. And so this is, boils down, what are the, so this ultimately kind of applies to systems, but also, organisms of all types, really, I think. Life in general. So I think we got stuck on entropy for a long time. Everyone sort of got stuck on that. And even though Shannon within about 2 years wrote a paper called The Bandwagon, and just saying, look, you guys need to calm down. There was a journal created by that point. It's like 1951. So I'm going to maybe connect to it at the end a little bit of this, with because entropy is sort of taken as this. It's called information, right? That's a terrible name. It's a terrible name. It's a real mislead. So that's a mislead. And the other mislead here is, and of course we've been talking about, is happiness, right? So you see it over and over. I was watching, something the other day, and just for the millionth time saw someone say, the pursuit of happiness or whatever, or I don't know, something, right? There's some, often funny and serious as well. So, what are, you think about, like planes, right? I mean, you have all these signals coming in. Like, what are you doing with those, right? So, I mean, a lot of it boils down to safety and danger. And so, how do you kind of instrument a thing to capture the environment and internals such that you're representing risk and dangers? And organisms have evolved to do that as well. So that's what we'll get to that. I mean, I didn't think that was happening when we started this work, but that's what we'll get to. In the meantime, we've also had I'm just going to, tend to be a little more focused. Let's see. So this is where we are now with the hedonometer. So this is the English one. And so, this is I think it's the 24th. So this is, in fact, the day we talked, right, online, I think. This was happening that day, yeah. So it was sort of very unclear, but, I mean, it was, it was unclear what would happen, of course, what happened with war, but I think by that point in the morning, it was, because, it's like 3 in the afternoon there or something, it was Russia is invading Ukraine. Of course, they've had hundreds of thousands of troops amassed on the borders, which have been developing for years, so it's remarkable to see people say, even leading up to it, they're not going to do it. Just for fun, right? Anyway, so this has become very serious. I don't know how much you've sort of involved yourself with looking at it, but lying in bed, I tended to inhale a war, basically, which was not ideal. So it's a serious thing. So this is a gigantic issue in history potentially. So we've added, we had Russian, and we've covered that. So let's just look at Russian. So this is important. I'm going somewhere with this. You can see this is a huge drop. So this drop is the biggest drop, and I wouldn't have had this to show you, right? No. Did I show you this? I couldn't have. Yeah, right. So this has to be done. This is done after Eastern Standard Time 24. So this is the biggest drop we've seen. It's a bit tricky, as you guys have seen with how we measure these things, but this is a 6 to 5.4. That's the biggest drop. We're using that same window of 4 to 6, chopping up that middle bit. Languages differ, in the range of scores. But this is something that was scored by Russian speakers. Not necessarily Russian, but in Russia, but they're Russian. We asked for that. We might have had that criterion too, I think. But so I think we might have too. So it should be Russian speakers in Russia. So what's perhaps interesting, okay, the drop is huge. And then if you look at the words, so there are all these things that just translate to war, right? That's our problem, I suppose. But so there's some swearing, shame. A couple words for shame, at least as it came here. Anxiety, Hitler. So there's some mixtures of that sort of thing. And I have to translate it again. This is the next day again compared to the 7 days before. Sort of similar shame again is there. Now, people have been trying to figure out what's going on in Russia, right? I mean, as much as part of all of this, because I said this early on, right? So in all forms of war, I suppose there are versions of this, but particularly for air combat or the war, the air warfare part, there's a framing of, let me get it, so air superiority. Maybe I said this to you guys, so I'm sorry if I did, but there's this framing, right? So you can have air supremacy, superiority, parity, denial, and it flips. Hang on, side you're on. If you're invading, you're bad guys or whatever, or maybe you're invading because you're the good, complicated, but you want to achieve this as quickly as possible. That hasn't really happened. But I sort of took this and reframed it with story, right? So story supremacy, story superiority, story parity, story denial, story capability. Now, Russia versus the world, Russia is, I think, here, a little flag here, and then Zelensky is, and Ukraine got to here within a few days. And that, I think, was not really expected.
Except for in China.
No, sure. Yeah, it's a place.
CCTV it's insane.
Yeah.
There are some it's like similar things where they just looked at what the general trend was.
Yeah.
I forget what.
Weibo.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. That's right.
So pure people being we support.
Yeah.
They used the word special verdict. It wasn't war.
That's right. You can't call it a war. Right,
It's
chemical.
all some
You've
special
probably
things.
seen these videos. You know, it is hard to tell what's true and false. You know, like you've got parliamentarians from Ukraine tweeting things, and maybe the photos aren't like it's very complicated. I mean, I think they're trying to earnestly do things, but you know, you have to really sort through stuff. There's a lot of people talking about logistics, right? There's a lot of those kind of characters. If you go online, you'll find people describing what they think is happening with wheels and tires on Russian. China, of course, famously controls it does it much more than Russia did. Russia was much more open about media relative. But China's got a lot of people involved in, and there's an article I pointed to in Puck's, Gary King's team, which their observation, their claim is that a lot of what goes on in Chinese social media is deflection, and so it's not outright arguing, but it's more just like talking, pushing it away, which is reasonable. But as you're saying, like it's just very direct. It's stating it, being, yeah. Of course, Putin, right? That's what they're saying. They're using this framing, and you know, I mean, so yeah, right. So within say the Western sphere for sure, but China's big. You know, India's complicated. You know, sort of a half energy. I mean, when you talk about system elements, there's a lot of energy comes from Russia into Germany. So they're, yeah, right. Oligarchs, I guess we don't need them as much, sort of, right? So people are, you know, whatever countries are getting hold of yachts, and the Chelsea owner is kind of gone. Like they weren't as integral. But you know, if more than half of your fuel comes from Russia, then you know. Right. So, and in terms of the story thing that you know that Russia started with, it was denazification, right? So that's being pushed. Really remarkably straightforward comments. There was one, the Russian embassy in Canada, which I think Canada has outside of Russia, has the largest Ukrainian diaspora, and which I guess I didn't know. But you know, and out west as well, you know, Ukrainian churches and schools, you know, there's a lot of, right. So, but they put out this one-page thing saying, yeah, no, it's just a, right, it's just a, what's the word again? What's the term again? Not war, but
yeah, special operations.
Special operations, denazification, you know, saving the Ukrainian people. Now that struggled, right? Because you read it and you're just like, this is immensely like just a, but you know. Yeah, but I mean, it has some hold in Russia, you know, it seems. So again, unclear.
One of the groups they do mention is like a far-right group, like the Azov militia,
Right, which exists,
which was adopted by the Ukrainian military, like
right.
government, like is now because of Russia.
Yeah.
Like Russia's blaming them for adopting, like basically the
Right.
Azov militia. They only did so because of the war in Donbass. That like the militia had to join to stop from Russia taking. So, like, they're right. Yeah, they did let
Right.
the right-wing militia join their military, but only because they couldn't protect themselves from Russia.
Well, so the thing was though that they were struggling a little bit with that story. I mean, it's just with sort of the initial. That's I don't even know what my thing is. So I know I tweeted from here. Yeah, so it's this thread here. If you can see this. So it's an NBC reporter. So this is, right, and in terms of story, like Putin's a good guy. That's a difficult story to be connected to, but you know. So it's this one now. This one is seeming to take hold, right? The biolabs. That there are biolabs in Ukraine, the US set up. And so this is about this danger thing. So Russia's trying to frame their actions as being in response to an existential threat to their, you know, right? This is supreme danger, and that's, you know, look, the U.S. did it with weapons of mass destruction, complete garbage, you know. And my wife and I, we lived in New York City, and we were there, in 9/11, and after Afghanistan, you know, the sort of world going to Afghanistan was generally sense, like it made sense. You know, everyone was kind of on board with trying to get Osama bin Laden, which of course was just in Pakistan eventually. But the Iraq War was really complicated, and you know, it definitely had a fabric element. So, I mean, but it, you know, but it was framed in that same way. Like they will do unbelievable damage. You know, chemical weapons. They will do horrible things to us unless we stop. There's no, like, we have no other choice. You know, there's sort of claims, and I don't know if it's true, but claims that, you know, they sort of set up in here and shoot out, maybe even kill some people in Russia. I mean, ideally you would do that, right? That would happen. Like, yeah. And then you can say, look at what they're doing. So anyway, but this is biolabs. So this is, you know, just the term. This is actually it's taken off here. I don't know what this is, number of posts across platforms. I'm not sure what that, you know, but it's similar to what we have with Story Wrangler kind of thing. But there was a sort of a small post even before the war, perhaps, I think, or before the invasion. And it just took a while to spread. And I think the comparison, and now you've got this sort of thing, right? Epstein, Maxwell, Fauci, right? It's getting a little, and Tucker Carlson has talked about it. It was a key part of it with, but I think there's a graph here. It's this one, yeah. So this is Russian in blue. So this is, you know, again, one of these social media things. So this is the US one, and the Russia's taken off with it. So it wasn't a pretext. It wasn't clear. But now that's the thing. The story is spreading. So you harness it, right? You harness this organically growing, like it's I mean, I think I framed it as like wild harvest. You know, you're wild harvesting conspiracy theories, right? That's what you know, just let a channel, whatever, you know, pilot do the thing. I mean, it all depends on what you're kind of looking for. And you can, of course, I mean, jokes work like this too, right? Funny jokes, right? Or also just great ideas, you know, so lots of things. So you see they're spreading and people are copying and taking off, and you can harvest. But this is definitely a case where, you know, you're throwing things at the wall, but you're actually not doing it. You're just watching to see what spreads. So the biolabs one, we'll see. Maybe in a week it's gone, right? Like, or tomorrow it's completely gone. But that's definitely, in terms of narratives, it seems to be taking hold, and something that, at least from what we understand, it's being talked about on Russian TV. So this is Fox, but it's on a Russian, being shown on a Russian. So then you have the whole thing. This happens to the New York Times, where the New York Times will post an op-ed by someone, because they tend to post op-eds from everywhere. So if you can get kind of a bad actor's op-ed in there, it's legitimate. Anyway, so that's a little bit off on stories. So we had last week, in a period of when I was sort of functional, the economists contacted us, and we made a connection with them. The piece that's out, the newspaper, as they call it, that's out this week, has the graphic detail, which is sort of the end piece to the news. I'm going to call it newspaper. So it was a good back and forth. Team did a good job, and you know, the person on that end, this is a connection we've wanted to make for a long time. They used our stuff at the end of 2020. Calling it Annus Miserabilis, and showed the hedonometer. So, but we said we had Russian, and we translated into Ukrainian. Do that as well. But this is just about Russian, you know. So they plot the recent thing. This is from a longer period of time, and got out Gallup polls to show it's too bad. But in terms of the standard, which we kind of avoid these a little bit, standard deviations from the norm, it's pretty huge. This is a really massive drop. But, you know, annotating things, Crimea, there's really nothing, right? The annexation of Crimea is a little bit of a drop. But you know, if you were looking at this from a distance, like something maybe happened here a bit, but nothing that. Compared to this, and again, it's this story that. So I'm very proud of the team for getting this to work. I think they have it down here. They kind of turned one of their word shift things like this, and so, you know, these are the positive and negative words. It's a bit hard to see them, tell these colors apart, I guess. But war against, the shame, scary, horror, Hitler. So these are negative words. So this is something where we're at least saying that, at least in this form of Twitter, and VK was the other one that was Russian. A person on that she scraped a bunch of VK accounts in this. She has a degree in PhD in neuroscience from Oxford. It's kind of became a data journalist. It's good. This is journalism is science with a deadline, right? Like that's how it should be. It's the best forms of both, because we're trying to tell the truth. Anyway, so that was, it's a thing. They called it grim and glum, I guess. We'll see. It's a diagnostic. It's getting something out that says, they're not happy. Right? Does this story fall apart, or does Russia internally become absolutely sure they're doing the right thing? Right? Because as you say, some people, there's China as well, but some people in Russia seem to be absolutely certain this is fine. They're not really aware of the details. So we set up the power and danger stuff, so it's sort of coming along. So let me show you now. So for Ukrainian, what we did was we took English and Russian and translated them and translated it back to see how well we could do. We've avoided doing that, but this is Ukrainian, but we've taken Russian and translated it. So the word for Russia has got a really high rating because it's rated by Russian, so we had to take that one out. It doesn't seem appropriate. So you can see the volume of tweets here too. It's huge, right? Really takes off. And it's gone down and stayed down. The Russian one was kind of digging its way out. If you look at the full one, very different thing, right? So here they're just going along. This is like being a place, it's sort of pretty stable. This is the Crimean annexation of Crimea, and then, there are other things that have happened along here. But the other thing here is the variance, right? Now it's just exploded. So real phase transition in the emotional state of a population, as measured through Twitter, etc. But this is really pretty horrible. So and there are attacks back here, but now it's down and it's stayed down. These are mostly the kind of thing we're used to, which is these sort of downward spikes. But that's there. So we're trying to get these ones up as well. So Ousiometrics, which I'll talk about now, but I don't think all the data's in. Let's see. Yeah, it's missing a bit. And the scale's not right and so on. But this is going to be a measure of danger. So let me just do 2020. Yeah, so the measure of danger is not great. This is George Floyd's murder. So this danger, higher danger, safer, more dangerous. And this is the insurrection, or the attack on the Capitol. So around Christmas and New Year's, there's drops, people are happy and so on. Terrible, some bad things happening still, but at least through this filter. And this is now Russia's invasion. It is registering now. So how do we measure these things? So there's danger, and then there's one other sort of the orthogonal thing is power. So let's do that. That works. This is going to be fairly flat. Yeah, you see the weakness in the. Oh, that's interesting, actually. Yeah. So we don't have all the words scored, so we don't have coronavirus and so on. So these are the whole thing's been muted, and the scale needs to be changed. But this is really coronavirus here. George Floyd's murder. So all right. So they're very rudimentary, and Andy Reagan's been doing great work to set that up. But yeah, so there's a really functional war. There's like supply chain issues and so to speak, and logistics. Can they? But it seems that there are maps of where the Russians have managed to get into, and they've just sort of made into some sort of boundary layer in terms of ground vehicles, and they have kind of stuff, right? Because now you have to set up more. You put fuel in there. So they're very functional, material, physical kind of stuff with the war, but there's also the story stuff that's sitting on top, which we'll see. I don't know. It feels like Putin, who you can go back to the last 20 years, like just a lot of stuff. People saying Russia's going, he's a tough guy, and I'm not just mainly Fox News, but I think there's what I came across one from 2001 or 2. It's the Earth is flat, whatever it is. He's an op-ed. He's a opinion writer in the New York Times. Ends with "I'm rooting for Putin," or "We should be rooting for Putin." Like, it was just this very like 2002 or something. Which now looks. It was so very optimistic, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so we will, let's see how this holds up. So this is going to be there's a paper that we produced last year. It's long, 30-something pages, but it's going to connect back to everything we've talked about, and let's see. So, meaning, what is meaning? It's pretty weird, right, to just talk about meaning, because we're going to use words to do it, and that's our thing. We like words, but you could have whatever facial expressions, the way people act, or something, and if you have a dog, a dog what's meaning to a dog, right? And how do they convey meaning to you? What do you think about it? Okay, they can tell you they're happy or sad. I mean, it seems reasonable. Or that Timmy is, trapped down a well again, that's conveying meaning. And it can be very specific. You guys are way too big. Lassie, you familiar with Lassie? It's one of the longest running shows ever, I think. And I think it was many, many dogs involved. Also. Yeah. But so you should know this. Australia had a rip-off. So what do you think Australia did instead of a dog? Called Skippy. Of course. So it's the same premise. It's sort of like pretty much like there's a guy who runs some sort of reserve, nature wild, thing or whatever, and there's a little kid, and he calls Skippy. He pulls a gum leaf off a tree and whistles. There's some sort of way he blows on it and whistles. Skippy turns up, and it's the same. Like kangaroos don't. They just they could just go. That's about it, right? So the kangaroo would do that. The cosplay, right? You interpret. Which way, Skip? It's 3 miles east.
Was it a good kangaroo suit, or was it real?
What's that?
Kangaroo.
The real kangaroo.
Was it tiny?
No, it wasn't a huge one. Skippy the bush kangaroo. The theme song is fantastic. I know I'm deviating, but this is a unreal amount of meaning derived from very few sounds. There you go. It was old when I was a kid. It was like reruns when I was a kid. So it was like
it's a
3 seasons. There's Skippy.
He's so cute.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're really cute. If you get a pet, if you get a little one and they grow up with you, they're very.
Wait, do people have pet kangaroos?
Well, you see, not allowed to, but Okay, I'm going to play you just a little bit of the intro. It's hilarious. Okay, this is. So he called him. Here comes Skip. Come on, Skip. Skippy, it's hilarious. I had a chopper. That's pretty serious, actually. Big Brother, I think. As you know, the dumbest animal in the world, right? So,
Oh, right.
yeah. And they're pretty dangerous, actually.
I thought it was a sloth. It reminded me of a sloth.
Koalas are really, their brains are just round balls. Yeah.
Very smooth.
Sloth is like night.
I think sloths know what's going on. It's a troop. This is hilarious. There you go. That's the
the
opening.
Trailer Park Boys vibe.
You see where it came from.
Yeah.
They should have something in there, like I don't know, what are they, a moose or something? Those guys should have some beavers. They should have some native. I want to see what happens in the winter with it. They just don't. They never even talk about it. I just really want, like what's his name, Randy.
It also helps the fact that all of them live in like that insulated.
It doesn't look. It looks really.
The only insulation
Oh, sure. Anyway, yeah, Skippy. So, that whistle. I mean, you could, it makes sense, but basically a kangaroo would skip. But that's a Lassie knockoff. I wonder if, I haven't looked, but I'm sure there are someone, there's maybe an ostrich in South Africa. Penguin.
You could run that analysis, give it to a TV show or a TV company, like these are all the animals you have.
Which ones performed the best? Which categories? What matching markets by animal?
What are you doing with it?
Anyway, so there you go. I'm glad to share that with you. Okay, so meaning, right? I'm just like, this is really hard. So how do you, especially by language? So, that's the problem with the dictionary, right? It's like it defines words in terms of words. So it's all a bit. And now, of course, we live in this age where dictionaries can, like abuse you on Twitter if things go wrong, which is pretty weird. And I think that's never get on by a dictionary on social media. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Merriam-Webster's particularly Twitter feed, but they all try to. There's been some real left in quality. It's like
Well, Twitter. I would say Twitter.
I know. I guess I'm just thinking about that. What's the one for the frozen meat from the Midwest?
Oh, steak.
Steakums.
So good. So good.
It's the oracle. It's like the wisdom, the wise.
I just want to, where did they find these people to run these accounts? Because they're really talented. They're really funny.
Giving out good advice with the pandemic. Just like the conspiracy theory stuff and whatever. And then they'll say, yes, and of course, we're like misleading you into buying frozen meat. It was excellent self-awareness, but it was just a. So, what are the essential characteristics of meaning? So, if you're playing around with Word, people use Word to vec kind of stuff. I mean, so it works, right? But it's this black box madness. Excuse me. I'm not contagious. 300 dimensions of meaning kind of thing. Like, let's put all the words into a 300-dimensional Euclidean space, and maybe it's just SVD, but we use the neural network, so cool. Or deep learning. Wow. And that's that's sort of fine, and it seems to have some. I mean, it has some properties that sort of suggest that, like, oh, maybe this thing is working. Like if you take the vector for, I mean, these are early stories, right? Like king minus man plus woman. Like if you actually, I don't know quite how this works. If you add that simple vector sum, then you get something that's close to queen. The pointing in this 300 dimension. So that seems rather remarkable. It's just sort of linear things, like it's not 2 times or, like it kind of worries me. True, but anyway. So that's sort of fine, but we know it's like, well, you kind of put it in space, but we know that meaning lives in some big hierarchical networks, right? Like you think of Wikipedia or thesaurus, things are adjacent to each other in some big network. And then you have to, what's that network? You're gonna.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I feel like Word2Vec is, when we use it, at least for LDA, it's like looking at what words or whatever topics are close to each other. So, but I don't feel like that. So it's parsing like the meaning relation by just looking at what's close to each other. So like the reason you can do like king minus man plus woman queen is because like if you look at what words are similar essentially, like if you were to do the math of what's the most, like that's what you would get. So, but I don't feel like it's actually doing like the meaning, putting it in a dimension meaning. If that makes sense. Like
Well, you don't. Yeah, what's dimension 7?
Right, exactly. It's just kind of learning what whatever relations are there that you have to train on. It's not actually capturing the underlying, which is the problem with like most deep learning, right? It's not actually going to understand.
Which seems to be reinforced every day that autocomplete does something.
So yeah, that's what exactly.
Autocorrect or whatever. Like it just puts in words that just are absolutely barking, like just you would love this. It's crazy.
And so that's like Word2Vec training like comes pre-trained in a lot of like really giant forms. So like that's not going to be helpful for you trying to parse meaning out of like some
your specific place.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's I mean, look, computer science is very gung ho about it, and they're having a lot of fun. I'm now in a computer science department, but I come from I want to understand things.
Right.
Absolutely. So I'm. Where is it? But look, and we saw like the toxic thing again. Just all these examples where it's like this is just. So I bring it up because it's been a huge success. It does do things. People are using it, maybe to their peril. Maybe it works, but in many places. And it's evolving and all those sorts of things. So that's fine. But that's sort of the big. But because I've also had some people are really far into this sort of say, oh, isn't this all done with Word2Vec? Like, haven't we sort of solved it? I mean, the thing is, like, what's the 23rd dimension? Like, it's a bit of a mess. It should be like, what's the network like? And people have played around with that for a while, but anyway. So we're going to be drawing down, just as we've done with happiness, to like the most essential stuff. Like, what is the most dimension of?
Could you use like Shannon quiz collapse meaning, or is that just?
I don't know. So I don't know. So how would you do it? What do you think?
Well, it's like the whole point of Shannon quiz is like what's the minimum sample? Just like reproduce it. Right. So like if you have this like, you'd have to like look at time series in a way of just. Sadness, where you had like a whole paragraph, how do you like reduce it into like its most minimal form? Be able to not necessarily undo that.
No, I understand. Yeah. Control theory is the part I really enjoy. But that's going to allow you to reconstruct. This is something where you boil stuff up and you can't. So this is going to say this paragraph. Well, we don't know. I mean, it might be danger, it might be fear, it could be happiness, it might be what are the fundamental, and it'll be like, so it's more dimension reduction. So it's that kind of, fits within that big class of work where you try to reduce the system down to a small, you're throwing stuff away, but now we've got something we can work with, and we can also understand it. Because once you get out to the 231st one, if you do an SVD, for example, if you looked at SVD for images, right? If you allow me, I'll do this. No, this is what's that?
It's like the handwriting stuff where people are like hand alter index representations to briefly recreate by changing or you can create it.
Have I put this in here and shown you this? This is my introduction to linear algebra. My linear algebra course was like the greatest. I love this. But a lot of this introduction was all about saying like linear algebra matters. You need to know this, and it's like often not held up against calculus problems. I showed you
Oh, I think you did show
with the snake, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but here's I think I have. Yeah, here it is. Yeah. So this is SVD for a picture, and at the end of the course, I would give them a little game where I guess what the thing is, right? So this is the first. Right, so SVD boils any matrix down to a sum of outer products with these weights. And these are orthonormal, part of an orthonormal basis, two orthonormal bases. So they have weight 1 in them, and this is what matters. So the singular values decrease. So it's a beautiful thing, right? It's a great understanding. And these are simple little operators, right? They look like this. So if you're multiplying something, this one goes in and goes boom, and then it's some multiple of. Anyway, we don't have to worry about it too much. But so it's basically adding like tartan layers of tartan to each other to make something. And this is just black and white. So the first one plus the second one gives you this, and this is supposed to show you like what's being added. And it's such a small. But now you can kind of see, like people would guess maybe it's a face. I mean, can you see, I know we start at the end, but can you see?
Scary.
It looks kind of wrong. What have I done? I think I've pushed on a thing, sorry. It's here. Yeah. Okay, so 3 was here, 4, probably. But the idea is what we're going to say is like what if we just had this? What if we boiled things down like this? As you add like the next 10 here, you go from here to here. I mean you can't see any change. It's pixelated already. It's only a 60 by 80, it's very small. So there's no improvement. Although these are all little, they're all small changes. So, but you wouldn't want to say the 54th one has, like, it's the such and such dimension of Einstein. It's not, right? It's like really just a little tune-up thing. Yeah. It's kind of fun. You should see this. I'll show you this. Just destroyed itself. I'm sorry I'm talking about it too much. I just want you to, like, PCA, right? I mean, PCA, SVD is the same thing.
No, like we did a project in our applied multivariate analysis class, which is like basically like a stats class with linear algebra. And our final project we did on beans because there was so much data on like all these different things like separate bean type. And then we did our
beans, like beans you eat.
Yeah, and then we did our PCA. There was really only like
data, so it was just called.
Yeah, and there's really only like 3 or 4 factors that actually mattered out of like all these this giant number of features. It was,
so what do you mean? Like you had the nutrition thing?
Well, yeah,
like,
like
just like no, the geometry.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
have
the
the
geometry.
being like the weight of the being, like the length of the curvature of the being, like all.
And when you did, they were like clear, like different groups.
Yeah, we actually able to, what was it? We did
That's been kidney. Kidneys are pretty recognizable, right? I mean, it's famous for being.
It was exactly no. It was really, we did like
Is that an
IDA, but what was it? QDA. We did QDA on it, and it worked like really well. Like when we had actually found which ones mattered. It was so funny.
You find the eigenbeans.
We found the eigenbeans.
Eigenbeans, the true beans.
Yeah. Well, another cool one we did K-means on images. We use that to like stratify like panels.
Yeah, I mean,
that was a really good class.
And that feels like you've really gotten something, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
what are the top categories? What are the fundamental categories of stuff? Right. So that's what we're trying to do. Good.
It was good. It was so funny. I remember we started it like, what if we just did this on beans? And then a week later, we're like, all right, we got a 20-page report.
Then you've got beans.txt. So what are the essential characteristics? The problem is we're going to be using words. We're going to have to really deal with it. And does it span some kind of space? Is it, should we talk about spaces? Should we talk about networks? We're going to talk about spaces. You want to think about that. My background, especially this kind of idea of a thesaurus, that it's sort of a network structure, and maybe when you have your 300-dimensional thing, really it's like some network kind of structure, hierarchical thing inside that. But eventually with high enough dimensions, if you make something 1,000 dimensions, you can stuff anything, In pure math, theoretical math, there's a, I'll call it that, let me call it that. There's this idea of graph embedding, right? So like you have just graphs. What's the minimum number of dimensional Euclidean dimensions for a Euclidean space that you could embed it in a way that the edges or whatever lots of games, right? This is Abed, so little community reference. This is the one where it's claymation. He searches for the meaning, and he opens a present. It's the first season of Lost on DVD. That's the meaning of Christmas. It's a metaphor. It represents lack of payoff. I should have the video, but it's good. I thought the meaning of people was somewhere in here. Then I looked inside Nicolas Cage. I found a secret. People are random. That's another one where he has to make sense of Nicolas Cage's ooh and basically. Because you cannot. Have you watched all of them?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that one, right? So you remember that? Yeah. Right. He crushes who's the boss.
Crushed. That makes the professor
This guy, he knows that straight
Yeah.
But all the definitions of so we got that, but Nicolas Cage breaks it. So meaning, so it's. I mean, as I've said, there are plenty of places to find happiness. Like if you, so to speak, in stories. So people talk about it, and it's not just stories now, but it's, as I said, the Socrates and these kind of characters running around talking about whatever eudaimonia, various things. Okay, so this is a sort of a starting point for all of this. It takes a while to find that starting point, but and I don't actually have the original thesis because publishing is just insane, and I can't quite unlock it. So Solomon, it was a thesis, University of Illinois. I guess it exists, but it's not something that was published in a review place. So that's the title: Factorial Study of Complex Auditory Stimuli. Okay. So factors is going to be like dimensions, right? That's the idea. And then in parentheses, passive sonar sound. So this is pretty bonkers, but this is after the Second World War. It's the Korean War, has come into existence. There's the Cold War sort of developing, right? So this is still, of course, a lot of research, and this is about submarines, right? So this is just from the introduction. The study represents a convergence of three disparate areas of it's pretty weird. So it's undersea warfare, and so there's naval sonar, so it pings, just got your radar. The nature of meaning, which is pretty weird pairing just there, and then these multidimensional scaling techniques, which I'm going to sort of let's just do it. So you've got someone sitting there with the headphones on and hearing pings, and that's the problem, right? How do they sort out what that means? Like, is there someone in danger, or is it sort of, there's the kind of which way is it moving? You can imagine that sort of part as well, but just what does the operator use to decode these signals? So that's what this is about, and the multidimensional scaling techniques. So we've seen these. These are the Likert scale semantic differential, right? So giving people semantic difference. So you listen to this sound, and I'll give you some semantic difference. Hard to soft. They may seem to have nothing to do with sound, but just put them somewhere. I'll give you a bunch of them, and then we'll do some basically matrix analysis on it and see if we can find out some elemental things. So it's a weird study. This was done by So the advisor for Solomon was Osgood. Now, Osgood is the main character behind all the happiness stuff. He's the one who wrote the Measurement of Meaning book. So it's all connected, but this seems to be the first time they've sort of started to really things up. But pretty weird. The meaning of pings. So the meaning of things is, as I said, this is Osgood's work from the late 50s. And here's where I'll sort of say, I mean, it's a great title, The Measurement of Meaning. Just quickly to say that this is an initial work that sort of founded this in 1954. It's submarines, and it's people working with radar and trying to understand what's happening, right? So just from pings. So the meaning of pings. So is that the nature of meaning, and then what are really semantic differentials? So putting together three very unusual pieces. So this is, part of body of. I mean, there are other things going on in the 40s and 50s, obviously as well, but that's an interesting one to have. So semantic differentials. They laid this out with students. Of course, you would do it with students in class. That other one was with actual real people, military people, sonar operators. So this is a classroom, and they did a mixture of things. I don't sort of have it here, but basically they asked people, students, like, to define meaning. What a good semantic difference. So they crowdsourced that. So, and they end up with about 50. So this is a little. I think it's on the next. Yeah, I'll come back to that one. So they end up with 50. So they sort of got people to suggest things, and they sorted through them and put ones together, I guess, whatever the same. Obviously some of these sort of overlap, but there's pleasant, unpleasant. I think there's going to be something like, happy, sad should be kind of similar to that. These are going to be sort of safe, dangerous, and powerful, weak. So my big claim is that these are really the fun things. It's not obvious. It was a struggle to get there, and there was certainly no, that's what it is from the start. But there's a real mixture. There's beautiful, ugly is in here. That's obviously, it's a meaning thing. I don't know how you measure that. Rugged, delicate, simple, complex. Then basic things like green, red, masculine, feminine. So it's a good mixture. And then other work we have with character categories or types of characters in fictional works. That's something that builds out of over 200 semantic differentials. Similar idea, and really remarkably, it boils down to the same 2 or 3 answers, completely different. So we'll get to that later, and that's huge. But that's Game of Thrones, Simpsons, Arrested Development, Community. So a lot of different. There's like 90 story verses. And
Julia presented on this last year.
What's that?
Did Julia about this?
I think I showed it to elements of it in class, but I don't think I did this. Please, I can't remember. I showed you some of it when it first came about. Yeah, but we'll fit it in here properly because it is a completely different origin. Anyway, that's going to come. Also, the theory of human stupidity. It's a great theory. It's by an Italian economist in the 70s, and I don't know, could be right. That's going to match up with this. Also, D&D, alignment charts. Okay, so they work with that, and just to start with, I think they maybe had 20 things, like words, like there were words again, like lady, man. They had 20 concepts. Really, I think that's what they're sort of playing with. So they had more semantic differentials than they had concepts, and they asked people to rate them. Each one you had to rate them on for each of these. So then you've got, this is the 50s, so now we're going to do some calculations. I mean, it's kind of hard work. Is that just I thought it was going to be music. Okay, so so that's one of the things that's going on here too, right? This is a decent number. There's 50 semantic differentials, maybe 20 concepts. So you've got a 50 by 20. You know, I mean, if you've ever tried to compute the eigenvalues of a 5 by 5, or you know, it's not enjoyable or something, right? So you have to do something computational. It's obviously laborious. So there are limits. So, okay, so what they did, they boiled it down to this and said, okay, we're going to call it evaluation, potency, and activity. And I know, you know, this was, and so, you know, what we're doing is we're going back to the root of all of this, for which we went off in the happiness direction. And that was from just this one dimension, right? What they called evaluation, we eventually, in the emotion world, it was called valence. So valence, which no one sort of understands, but this, fair enough. Like you can imagine a dog, right, or a nematode, perhaps, or you know, like a snail could have some primitive version of that. So success is going to line up for this powerful, which is very much character. So you could be evaluating yourself, something else. You know, if you're evaluating something else and you say, you know, it's bad and strong, you know, that's worrying, right? The danger category. And then, you know, so, you know, like if you see a snake, let's say you're in Australia, you see a snake, you know, you will probably presume, because you will rightly presume it's poisonous, because they mostly are. And you'll probably think this, because if you grow up with this like I did, right? I mean, there's snakes everywhere. But it could be asleep, right? So this is sort of puts it into some, you know, these are reasonable dimensions to have. If it's slithering around, like that one time where I saw one on the lawn, or, you know, yeah, there's a whole story. Anyway, which I told over and over and over in show and tell. He told me to shut up. But I just forgot. This is my problem, I do this. Anyway, but it captures a lot here. It captures a lot here, right? Okay, this is the story. So I have two younger brothers. There are three of us playing. My mother was cutting my father's hair, and it's outside of the yard. This is near. It's a couple of miles away from what's called the Big Desert, and it's like a, you know, isolated farmhouse. And I go back in. I remember I was going to get my pail and shovel. I was less than. I must have been 3 or 4, and. Anyway, so because I know we left that place at 4.5. So there's a huge brown snake going across the lawn or the grass, and the common brown snake, totally poisonous. Small ones, babies, doesn't matter, they're all poisonous, right? The little ones. So, you know, did the thing that you programmed to do, run back out and yell about the snake. And the next memory I have is my father on the other side with a stick with the snake hanging off it, right? Because there was a stick against the tank, which was called a waddy, an Aboriginal word for. That's one way you get rid of a snake. That was a shotgun. Or very common method was, you know, there were just snakes and birds everywhere. And so driving around, you would commonly hit birds, parrots of all sorts. Just like, geez, you know, like, because there's wheat on the roads and they're all fat. And it's, you know, you're not trying to do that. But snakes, and this, I'm not saying this is good at all, but there's memories of the families driving along, or there's a snake on the road because it's hot, right? Like the snakes get out. So you would run over the snake very deliberately, but you also lock it up, so because you want to make sure you skid over the top.
He's like, no, we don't want to roll, we want to squat.
Look, the weekend activity was shooting stuff in that desert to go out, called spotlight, because someone will hold a spotlight, and then there's 3 guys standing in the back with shotguns, in the back of a pickup, and the Mara twins would come in every Monday on the bus ride in, which is about 40 minutes. They detail how many things they shot on the weekend, mostly rabbits. So anyway, for some reason my family did not do that, but my little brother did. Blowing away some gear, as he would refer to it. Anyway, so, oh my God. Interesting. Well, so, okay, so but you know, like this is a fair basic thing, right? I mean, just as I said, I mean, snake is a bad thing. It's strong, you know, there's no question, and it was active. This is like, you know, all the alarm bells go off. You know, and the snake probably should have been worried about me, which is probably true. But you know, you can imagine organisms have this same kind of thing, like a deer sees or an antelope sees a lion pop out of the whatever, or they're asleep, or you know, they have to, these are really, and then you can see why your emotions just go into this and kind of react, right? This boom, you know, make you do stuff. Fight or flight. So you can be sitting there with your Word Direct 300 dimensions or your thesaurus thinking about what is a rabbit, what is a lion, you know. That's not how we work, right? I mean, in this basic. Of course, if we sit down, we have this extra layer of thinking where we can take our time, but you know, people behave like this in you know, meetings, you know, boardrooms, or schools, or whatever, you know. We have this stuff that's built in. All right, so I did, because I like, you know, I mean, whatever. I like to do this. So it's not just for complete silliness, but came up with a new term here, which is Ousiometrics, because it isn't the measurement of meaning, as I've sort of absolutely belabored. You know, there's every detailed aspect of meaning. Like, what does this word truly mean in its most nuanced, right? And how many different meanings might this word have, or what? So there's the very fine-grained meaning of something. And in some ways that's not, well, sorry, not in some ways. That is not what Osgood and so on were really looking at, right? When they say measurement of meaning, not really. They were doing measurement of essential meaning. So this is the term. What's the essential meaning? And what's the essential? And it could change in time. It could be in context. So we'll call it the Ousiometrics quantitative study of the essential meaning, meaningful components of an entity, whatever it is, right? However you perceive it. So Ousia, I'll say that in that way. You'll see it in philosophical texts, theological ones. And then, you know, here's the ancient Greek. So it means that's where the word essence comes from. So sort of casting around. I have a predilection for Greek roots, so it has to be that. Hedonimeter, for example. So it's different to semantics, semiotics, these other kinds of things, which are more, they'll go into the, you know, these are going to cover everything in terms of how meaning is signified. So as I said, it's essence. So we're going to have an ousiometer, which I showed you this first version of, it's sort of starting, and ousiogram. It's helpful to have, I mean, it is different to these other pieces, so it's helpful to do that. And then Telegnomics, or Telegnomics, right? So this is a distant sensing of knowledge, and so that's the big story of what we're doing overall. We're measuring things from a long way away. So it's remote, you know, telephone is far. I told you about the telephone, right? But it's far knowledge. That's the idea. So we're not going to, because it has to be compared to close reading. This is Franco Moretti is sort of the person who, at least as I understand, framed this idea of distant reading. I mean, people have been interested in looking at corpora for a long time. You can go back in time, just counting up all the words in the Bible, you know, Zipflaw, ages ago. But doing this in this big kind of scale that we're kind of getting to now. Google Books, of course, being sort of the first really, really big example. Very problematic. We'll talk about it later on. But that's just the term I want to. So, I'm going to go through this, but it's interesting to go back and see when do people talk about these things. Hedonimeter, right? I mean, what the word that we went with there was used or framed by Edgeworth in the 1860s. You know, we can measure happiness. We make this thing. Slightly different spelling. Anyway, so this is a German psychologist, I think, who really kind of thought about it quite exactly, like 3 dimensions, like really right angles. Said I think we can do this. It's late 1800s. This is Morabian and Russell. They take Osgood et al.'s EPA framework, right? So that's evaluation, potency, activity, and they do this. This is, and of course we've traveled through this. This is what I've showed you before. So just to connect it properly, this is what becomes the hedonometer's basic thing. And when we first got some of this data, the so-called ANU stuff, what we saw was there just wasn't a lot of variation for these. So this is a problem. I mean, I'm going to use all the words on top of each other. How they evaluated words for evaluation, potency, activity. Not a lot of variance. And I think that was, well, partly the problem was it was only 1,000 words. It wasn't a sample. It wasn't in any way a reasonable sample of. So this is what's a bit odd is, and maybe it's just because measuring essential meaning is a big deal, but psychology is gigantic, and when it got ported over to that, they flipped things around a little bit. So this potency is dominance, but they put it back here, and arousal and activity, so that goes there. So it should be maybe VDA, but that became the standard nomenclature, and people kind of forgot this connection. This is really, it was personally very hard for me to figure out, going back through literature, that these have the same root. Not that they were established in different lines and someone said these are kind of similar. It's actually this work here at the end of the 70s, 80, well, maybe early 70s, yeah, where they explicitly say, I was going to do this stuff for essential meaning. Okay, in emotion, we're going to carry it across. We'll give it different names because we're in the emotional space, and it seems reasonable to. Arousal, look, it's an awkward word. It's not. It doesn't sort of hold up over time, but it's just meant to mean different activity, like physiological. Like your system. Because what they're going to really try to do is measure this activity in people. Which is not really like I don't want to do it anyway. So, but I realize it's in. So it's a bit of a funny term, but it's something that just in that literature made sense. Yeah, and so then that these are orthogonal, right? Just a sort of went supposed maybe a long time ago has become kind of a hard fact to the point where someone will they'll measure VAD for something and find that they correlate a little bit. Say, well, maybe they didn't understand it. Like it's a fault of the people doing this, taking the survey, or maybe we just didn't ask them right. So, okay. What I want to sort of stress is that these are pretty good, right? These are pretty good antonyms, and heavy by itself could have a whole bunch of meanings. Right? Something's like really intense, it's heavy there. But when you put it with it's an antonym, it really anchors its meaning. So these are not to be sort of separated out by themselves. It's a bit problematic. But written as a pair really gives you a very clean, generally speaking, a pretty clean dimension for someone to kind of understand. Like you say, I want you to. I mean, it's difficult, but you have to rate something on the so the loose type line, okay, you've got a sort of a -4 and a +4 and a 0. Just put it somewhere. If it was just loose by itself, you might think that could, or type could mean something else, right? That could mean, you're stingy, but it's very clear. Anyway, yes.
It's like you're saying only a few of the same word, like a suffix. Actual words, even, uneven, colorful, colorless.
Oh, so you're saying that there aren't too many that are.
Like I feel like
yeah.
Words, like you were saying earlier, like a lot of words in there, like unhappy meaning, have like a.
Well, we do have a lot of those, yeah. They didn't really go with that here, yeah, which is interesting. Oh, you're right. So, and I don't know if that means they just, I mean, in some ways it sort of suggests, it's a very good point, it suggests that these are such these are somewhat important. The negative, you know, we have a special word for it. Right, it's not just the absence of. The point with that is that usually the positive one is the end. When we do the prefix thing, we usually have the, yeah. So we don't say unsad. Someone goes, I'm feeling unsad. I mean, it's kind of would be weird. Like if you do a bunch of those, it's kind of weird. Like people will feel it. So yeah, it's funny, right? It would tickle your brain because it's like a bit. It's not the pattern that you expect. I'm feeling unsafe. You can say not unhappy, which is.
I've heard.
You know, you say you're not unhappy, but you're not really saying you're happy, right? Like you're kind of. I'm not unhappy. It means you hate it. The reason I went back to that was to say, like, here are the, you know, here's the problem is now you're going to say to people, oh, I want you to evaluate these things, like a set of pictures of cars or whatever, right? And I want you to evaluate them on all of these dimensions. But now we're going to have to tell them what we think activity is, like high activity, low activity. We have to define, right? Maybe it's easy, but we have to define what we think, how we want people to think about potency. So you have to tell them that. So we started with a whole bunch of semantic differentials. Now we've distilled it to 3. They aren't semantic differentials that are in that group necessarily, right? They're kind of bigger ones that encapsulate them. And the problem is going to be that people will become cloudy in their definitions of these endpoints. We've seen this before, but they'll do that, and they won't be stable over time. So a couple of other books here. Yeah, this is again, like, in principle, functionally independent of the other two. None of the 3 dimensions could be subsumed, which we'll see is actually not really true. Because when you actually ask people on a big enough scale and you say, here's activity, or here's valence, arousal, and dominance, or you don't even use those words, but just define the endpoints for them and let people go, they really correlate. Yeah, so we'll come back to this. I think this is a good place to come back to. Probably collapse horribly now, but so just to kind of give you a suggestion, we'll start with this on the next Thursday. But this is, you know, we started with very small studies, which makes sense. Now we have tens of thousands online ratings, so we have 8 people. The focus on types alone and not tokens. I just want to go through this slide before we leave. So we're going to give you one word and one thing. We want you to evaluate it, and then we'll just talk about that, see if we can say something about the whole space. You have to take into account how often they're talked about, how often they're used. That's what those jellyfish plots we're getting at. You really see that people really do not. I mean, this types and tokens comes out of linguistics, but you just see people don't use it. The Likert scale, which seems pretty good, we understand it, but it's possible to use other scales, and we'll see the use of a different one. So the problem of doing this kind of factor analysis and saying, I think this dimension is this. Like, how do you figure out what a dimension is? Here, we've done SVD. We started with 50 semantic differentials. The most important one is, you know, semantic differential 10 times 0.3 plus some linear combination of the semantic differentials you have already. It's pretty. Your brain will turn to porridge trying to think about it. This is pretty hard. So even just identifying them and then trying to say what are the endpoints, that's this part. So the expert chosen endpoint descriptions and the dimensions of it. You know, how do we get people to really hew to these things, which we made up? Like, how do we really sure about them, and then how do we present them? Now, you can just present people with endpoints, let them go, and then see if it worked. But people tend not to do that. Oh, God, sorry. It's grotesque. Okay, so, all right, well, we'll keep going. I'm trying to get going again, I know. But I'll give you stuff to work on here. And hopefully, we'll have a bunch of different papers, one about community. It's kind of the idea, yeah. I think the rest of the sort of founded in my assignment generation, but we'll be just trying to make things will end up as figures in the paper, right? Which I want to do for them.
Can't be expensive as a jellyfish plot.
If someone,
How long do those take to run? Because I'm guessing you made those in the back.
no, just
Laptop?
they're not bad. They're not bad.
Good job.
The biggest problem with, say, the slowest ones to make are the allotexonometer ones, right? But what's really the slowest part, so when you make figures, this is just advice, right? All the data analysis, it's got to be a separate box, right? Like data is here, analysis, and then your figure script is this, or whatever you do is like a separate thing. So you can run it quickly. Figures shouldn't take, it should be second.
Data aggregating.
Yeah, it shouldn't be in the figure like computing all this stuff. Like, because I've come across students doing it, like say, oh, each figure takes 10 hours to make. I'm like, and it turns out they're doing all the analysis. No, you gotta. I mean, I know you understand, but I feel like I need to say it. I feel like I need to say
No,
it.
I mean, for some of the assignments though, I'd like start it and be like, oh, I'm just gonna like
Do it all in one
make it
thing?
like and when I'm testing it,
Like,
execute it by like doing one thing, and I was like, okay, I'm not doing. And then I was like, oh, this is silly. Like, let me.
No, you need
do
to.
all the.
But I mean, that's part of figuring things out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
I mean,
okay,
That's what these
as
classes
long
are
as you
for.
do that once you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jupyter things kind of, I don't know. Where do we stand on them in terms of happiness?
They're like helpful. I find it helpful for development. I would like, but as
Yeah.
far as like, okay, something someone else has to use.
Give it a script.
Yeah. And give you like really specific reading instructions.
I mean, I was happy for them to exploit it. If they take off, they take off. But I've always felt like it should be
Well,
just
some
in a script.
companies invested entirely in them, and they have like all of their infrastructure run on notebooks, which is like terrifying to me.
Someone's going to be paid a lot of money in 30 years to know what that is. They're going to be.
Fix all of that and be like, wait.
This guy knows Jupyter.
it's gotta be its own
Like
language.
four left. You get $1 million every month.
All right. Have a great day.
All right, thanks,
Thank you.
guys.